Fabulous. Thank you. Thank you, Simon. I think this is now a great opportunity for me to bring in Craig and Les. Perhaps, Les, I can ask you to share a perspective as you've been a client, you've worked with this kind of insight, and just really, interested in your perspective on this.
No, thank you. I would say that for me, the beauty of the reputation survey is that it's so data-driven. And because it's so data-driven, I really gained credibility as a communications person with our CFO and investor relations. So it was a great partnership because they understood the numbers. The other piece is, and Simon referenced it, is really around helping me to build out a really stronger media relations strategy, because then it was very clear what we needed to focus on. So, and then, this was a piece that I hadn't really thought about going into it, but it really helped me with measurement and really having a baseline. So, so very often it's hard to quantify what we do as an organization or as a function, and being able to have those numbers and then being able to see it move over time was very helpful. So that's kind of how I think the survey helped. And looking at the current survey results, I think what struck me was how COVID really drove so much of it, and so much of the movement as it relates to things like corporate social responsibility and people management. Because I think in the past, while these things were considered nice to have, probably the focus wasn't really on them. And now I see kind of the broader trends that it's not going away, and that's something that people or companies are going to continue to watch.
Thank you, Les. And Craig, I know you've been very involved in different ways, obviously at J&J and subsequently with a number of your other engagements as well. Interested in your perspective, how you see the results in relation to the US currently, and how you see it being useful ahead.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks, Sandra, and thank you, Simon, for that well thought through rundown of everything. And I agree with everything Les just said. And it's funny. I feel like every time Simon takes us through the data, not simply because we're looking at updated sets of data, but I pick up something new or different or gain an additional insight. And I really like, Simon, I think I heard you say at the outset, this focus on both narratives and leaders. And I think that's what I take away from this each time I see the data. And it's how, Sandra, as you know, and Les, I think as you know, how we used it at Johnson & Johnson, and how I've been able to bring it forward to my clients through my consultancy. It allows us to put intentionality around the strategies that we choose to embrace and operationalize. Simon, I think I heard you say also that reputation can't be assumed. And we know that, but it allows us just to really place a certain focus on those areas that are going to matter, not simply to the investment and financial community, but to all the stakeholders who influence the reputation position that we hold or aspire to. So, that's how I look at this. Simon, do me one favor though, because, and I know I have asked you this many, many times in the past, and yet, for whatever reason, there's a mental block here. Give me a little bit more insight, again, if you would, into the use of corporate assets, would you?
Use of corporate assets, how a company is seen to manage at a high level the various things in its control. So use of corporate assets would include anything from sort of share buybacks to mergers and acquisitions. It's, if you like, how the pieces of the puzzle are arranged by the CEO and chairman and maybe CFO.
Got it. Thank you for that yet again. I like the expression that you used off of good pandemic. I think about, the notion, I used to think about, is the tail wagging the dog here? And I think what these data point to us us is that those companies that really put intentionality around their reputation efforts and embrace these data, it's not the tail wagging the dog. It's that you can use these data, as Les alluded to, you can use the data strategically, thoughtfully, and wisely to advance your reputation and at the end of the day, even enhance your market value.
Craig, Les, Simon, thank you. And I think delighted to open it up. Jen, Alan, John, Gwen, others who may have questions. And I think as you think through, if you have questions to ask, please unmute yourself. And Reg will put the spotlight on you. Just to take that last point, Craig, that both you and Les made very well. It is, we always talk about reputation for what, among whom, for what purpose. This is from the investor perspective, yeah, but it's often helpful, particularly in the work that we do, where we're doing reputation audits, looking at it from different stakeholders, internal, external, NGOs, regulators, whatever. Then you can also bring in a value element to it and saying, this is actually working for us or not working for us, or we're not talking about it, and it actually has a demonstrable value. In addition to everything else that one's thinking about, you can see this helps organizations prioritize and say, yeah, we're hearing this elsewhere as well. So whether it's that people side or it's the other elements around it, that suddenly you actually have some numbers to speak to it, and just to help drive that prioritization among all the different things that organizations are challenged with. So yes, thank you, all three of you. Jen, I know you have a question, and I think Reg will put the spotlight on you.
Okay, thank you very much. Firstly, Simon, fascinating and incredibly useful data. And then Les, I just love the way you're talking about applying it together with Craig and even Sandra. Really important. So my question is a sort of one you may have got in the past, which is what you're looking at primarily here is the sentiment of investors, and for a very long time that has been overwhelmingly big professional institutional investors. And what we saw last year, particularly with the GameStop situation here in the United States and the Robinhood trading system, which is actually highly gamified. It's designed for complete amateurs. To what extent do you think that phenomenon is going to shift investor sentiment writ large towards a more unprofessional, let's say, a more consumer-driven attitude towards these metrics? Or do you think that's sort of a flash in the pan and we don't really have to worry about that just yet?
I think, there's quite a lot in there. As a rule, I think what we're seeing is this, I hesitate to use the word, but I will, almost a democratization of share ownership. There's been a bit of a shift, we know, and there are a lot of people now dealing at the edges. And it is only the edges in value terms. It might not be the edges in numbers terms, but in value terms, it is there. And because they are less able to consume and access the kinds of hard evidence that the institutional investors can get, a lot of it comes down to reputation. And then we see these things like the GameStop thing as a kind of very small subset of that, where people are starting to have a bit of fun. And that can operate at the very small end of companies. Well, sorry, it's still a lot of money, but compared to the likes of an Amgen or a General Electric or whoever, it's a drop in the ocean. Broadly speaking, with the institutional investors where these reputations are working, there is still a lot of influence, and perhaps it's coming back as we're seeing the reduction in sort of the professional investment analysts, as the banks have sort of like pulled back, and they're either having to charge for those services, since MiFID and what have you, and I think that's leaving reputation again to start to have a greater impact. So you've got almost different forces all coming together. And what we're seeing is, if you like, the current status of things, which is it's still very important, but the importance, I mean, in terms of, because it's proportionately important, but that we're seeing mostly due to what's going on in the markets rather than sort of these more structural changes yet. Could happen, but we don't know.
Wonderful,
Great.
thank you.
Great question, Jennifer. Thank you for that. Something to watch. Alan, you've got your hand up, and then Tarquin. Reg, if you can spotlight Alan.
Simon, thank you very much for all that. I'm just thinking at the back of my mind is, I wonder if you'd agree that there are occasions when investor confidence, which is obviously key to your theory here, can turn into sort of wishful thinking. And that there might be occasions, when the, as it were, the reputational dividend becomes dangerously high and is in itself a warning sign that things are getting out of line a bit. I wonder if your methodology would be able to pick those up. I mean,
Yeah, I think, well,
banks before the crash, that sort of thing, or some of the the startup tech firms which have huge market caps and then turn out to be
sure
substantial.
Well, we're not measuring investor confidence per se. We're actually measuring the result of the effect of investor confidence. So it's how it manifests. We do see early warnings, or we can look back at events and interpret things as early warnings. I wouldn't be so arrogant as to say we spotted it before it happened, or I'd be much richer. But yes, it does show, and you can see how these things are manifesting, and the kinds of confidence that is, if you like, a goodwill running ahead of the event tends to happen far less in the investor community and sort of the corporate observer community, who tend to be a bit more circumspect than, say, the investor community. We, for instance, we look at the numbers for ESG, CSR, I mean, stubbornly low in terms of their importance, because investors won't move on them, or won't move on a judgment of that until they see the materiality of it, and the materiality is not shown. So lots of people might jump up and down and get terribly excited and think it's the most important thing ever, and it could be for them, and it is very important for consumers, but for investors, no. And our data sort of tends to reinforce that in spades.
Good question. Thank you, Alan. Has that answered your question fully? Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Thanks, Simon. Tarquin, last question to you, and then we'll wrap up.
Thank you. Actually, Simon just touched on it. Just his last few remarks, just around ESG, which is an area of particular interest to me, and that stubbornness to shift. And I just wonder what it is the investment community need to see in terms of materiality to see that ESG needle begin to tick up in terms of its proportional contribution to that reputation dividend.
I mean, not surprisingly, there's been a lot of work done in this by other people, sort of other than
huge
the
amount
work we've done. And I think one of the most telling judgments, conclusions, came from a pair of fellows at Harvard, who are advocates of the whole ESG thing, but they declared that it has it doesn't do anything for alpha, disproportionately greater profit, but where it does start to tickle an interest is when it's showing a material financial benefit, which raises the question, well, is it the ESG part of it, or is it the material benefit? It tends to be the material benefit. So show how it improves profit rather than take away from margin. I mean, the simple equation at the moment says either restrict the business somehow in terms of what it's performing, or I put up my costs. and that can't earn me more money. And as an investor, I'm actually required by law in the United States to maximize my investment. So show how it's improving the financial returns, show the materiality of that, and you've got them.
Yeah, and I think that's right, Simon. And it's certainly something we see in the Britain's Most Admired Company study, which we run, where we see that golden triangle of CSR, ESG, linking to innovation, linking to people. And if you get that lovely holy triangle right, and it's driving your innovation, it's driving the changes, it's driving the revenue generation that you're looking for, and the talent acquisition, then you've got that, you're starting to get that materiality. But on its own, it's not just about a nice to have, it's actually that transformation.
It's simple. Show them how it makes it, the investment deliver a better return.
Yeah.
Show that, and you got them. It doesn't matter what you can all paint ourselves pink. If we can prove it sort of shows that it delivers a better return, then the investors will go for it.
And I know, Simon, you've penned and you're just about to publish a whole paper on that, which we'll share. And I'm just very mindful of everyone's time. We've just passed the hour. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, Les, from London temporarily before you go back to the West Coast. Craig, thank you from home in New Jersey. Simon on Southwest London, and all our guests. Thank you so much. We'll be sharing this deck and the report, and look forward to continuing our conversations. Thank you. Thanks all.
Thank you so much. Lovely.